Once upon a time, in the southern lands where the river Omari stretched like a silver serpent, there stood a settlement known as Onini Village. Every morning before the first cock crowed, fishing was not merely work in Onini. It was honor, pride, and survival. Among all the fishermen, one name consistently echoed louder than the rest. That person is Uduak. He was strong, broad-shouldered and tall. Uduak owned the largest fishing boat in the village. It was painted black with red stripes and named the River King. He polished it every evening and boasted endlessly about it. No man in Onini owns a boat greater than mine. He would often declare loudly at the fishing docks, and no fisherman can catch fish larger than I do. The other fishermen tolerated his arrogance because arguing with him usually ended badly. Uduak insulted people easily. He mocked weaker fishermen, laughed at old men whose strength has faded, and refused to share fishing spots with anyone. If another fisherman paddled too close to his boat, he shouted furiously, "Stay away from my waters!" He barked one hot afternoon at a younger fisherman named Ebuka. "Do you think fish gather where poor men paddle?" The young man quietly moved away, while the others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Only one man in the village never feared Uduak, Uzo. Uzo was younger than Uduak by a few years, but he possesses something greater than physical strength. He possesses kindness. He often helped old fishermen repair torn nets and shared portion of his catch with widows who could not afford food. Unlike Uduak's giant decorated boats, Uzo's canoe was simple and wore for years of use. Yet somehow, his net always returned heavily with fish. The villagers admired him greatly. This admiration burnt Uduak like fire. One humid evening, during the rainy season, the villagers gathered near the shore to sort their catches. Thunder rumbled far away while dark clouds drifted across the sky. Uzo pulled a giant silver fish from his canoe. The crowd gasped. "That fish is big. I had never seen one that size." Even the village chief fisherman stepped closer in amazement. Uzo smiled humbly. The river was generous today. But across the shore, Uduak stared with burning jealousy. His jaw tightened with anger. His fingers coiled inside fists. The fish Uzo caught was bigger than any fish Uduak has caught all month. For a long moment, he stood there silently, his face hard with anger, while rain began falling softly around him. Then he spat into the sand. "Luck," he said bitterly. "Nothing but foolish luck." Uzo heard him and walked over peacefully. "Brother," Uzo said kindly, "the river blesses all men differently. Tomorrow may favor you." But Uduak glared at him. "Do not call me brother," he shouted. "You pretended to be humble so the village can praise you." The fisherman quietly stepped away, sensing trouble. Uzo sighed gently. "Why must your heart always compete? Because weak men are forgotten," Uduak shouted. "Only greatness survive." Without another word, he stormed towards his boat and disappeared into the rainstorm. That night, white thunder cracked across the sky and wind shook the roofs of mud houses. The river spirit disliked proud men. Jealousy blinds wisdom. The river gives blessing, but it also punished greed. No one knew that the river had already begun watching Uduak, and deep beneath the dark waters of Omari River, ancient eyes had already turned towards him. The next morning arrived. The river looked strange, unusually lively as sparkling at dawn. Fishermen muttered nervously as they prepared their nets. Old fisherman Gregory frowned deeply. The river filled the storm, he whispered, but Uduak ignored all warnings. He had spent the entire night thinking about Uzo's giant fish and the villagers' admiration. Jealousy poisoned his thoughts until sleep refused to visit him. Today, he promised himself he would prove his greatness once again. He pushed the river king into the water aggressively and paddled further than every other fisherman. His powerful stroke carried him deep into part of the river many avoided. The deeper waters were mysterious. The surface darkened there. Great trees leaned over the riverbank like ancient guardians, and strange sounds echoed from hidden places within the forest. But Uduak cared only about fish. He threw his large net into the river and waited. Hours passed. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Again and again he cast his nets, but they returned nearly empty. His frustration grew hotter beneath the burning afternoon sun. Some fishermen could easily be seen paddling home with successful catches. "Curse this river," Uduak growled. In anger, he moved even further into forbidden waters. Waters Elder warned fishermen never to disturb. The area was called Spirit Bend. Legends claim river spirit lived there, but Uduak laughed at such stories. "Old people invent tales to frighten cowards," he said. Then suddenly, his net jerked violently. Uduak nearly lost balance. His eyes widened in surprise. Whatever was trapped beneath the water was powerful. At first, he grinned widely. A giant fish, he shouted excitedly. He pulled with all his strength. Sweat poured down his face as the net fought against him. The water began glowing faintly. Uduak froze. The glow became brighter. Then the river surface burst open. The strange golden creature emerged tangling inside the net. Uduak stumbled backward in terror. It was not a fish. It was a human. It was both. The upper body resembled a young woman with shiny golden skin and a long silver hair, flowing like water itself. But below her waist stretched a magnificent fish tail covered in radiant golden scales. Her large eyes glowed blue like moonlight underwater. A mermaid. The creature gasped weakly while struggling against the net. For a brief moment, fear seized Uduak's heart. Every child in Onini village knew the sacred story. Mermaids were guardians of the river. Touching one brought terrible consequences. The proper thing was to free it immediately. But greed entered the mind before wisdom could speak. A golden mermaid. Surely, such a creature carried all imaginable blessings and wealth. Perhaps possessing it would make him richer than every other man in the kingdom. Perhaps it will make Uzo disappear from people's admiration forever. The mermaid stared at him pleadingly. "Please," she whispered weakly, "return me to the water." Her voice sounded like music mixed with sorrow, but Uduak's greed had already consumed him. "No," he said slowly. The mermaid's eyes widened with fear. "You do not understand," she whispered urgently. "I cannot live on land." "You will bring me fortune," Uduak replied. He quickly grabbed an empty fishing sack and forced the struggling creature inside. The mermaid cried out painfully. At that exact moment, the river darkened. The boat shook violently. The waters beneath him churned angrily. Uduak's confidence trembled for a second, but greed pushed him onward. He tied the sack tightly and paddled home as fast as possible. Behind him, Spirit Bend became silent once again. But those dark waters, unseen forces, had awakened. By the time Uduak returned to Onini village, evening shadow had already begun stretching across the land. Smoke rose from cooking fires while villagers gathered around small lanterns to prepare supper. Uduak moved carefully. The heavy sack containing the mermaids squeaked occasionally, forcing him to grip it tightly. If anyone discovered what he carried, they would force him to release it immediately. He avoided the main pathways and quietly entered his hut at the edge of the village. His home was larger than most fishermen's houses because of his wealth. Animal skin decorated the walls, and fishing trophies hung proudly from wooden beams overhead. Once inside, he locked the door. The sack moved weakly on the floor, slowly, Uduak untied it. The golden mermaid emerged painfully. Her glowing skin appeared duller now, and her silver hair clutched weakly around her shoulders. She looked at him with her desperate eyes. "Please," she begged softly, "take me back before night fully falls." But Udua crouched beside her with greedy fascination. "You are beautiful," he whispered. The mermaid closed her eyes sadly. "You have brought disaster upon yourself." Udua ignored the warning. "What treasures can you give me?" he demanded. "Gold, riches, power." The mermaid stayed at him silently for a long moment. Then she spoke quietly. "There are laws older than men. The river and the land must remain separated. If one of my kind remains on land, balance will break." Udua scoffed. Those are tale stories of our forefathers. It doesn't exist." But suddenly the lantern flame inside the hut flickered violently. The mermaid whispered again, "Return me before midnight." Yet greed blinded him completely. He dragged a large wooden tub into the center of the hut and filled it with water from clay pots. Then he forced the mermaid inside. "You will stay here," he said firmly. The mermaid lowered her head in sorrow. That night, strange things began happening throughout Onini village. The river suddenly overflowed without rain. Fishes' boats broke loose from their ropes mysteriously. Children woke up screaming from nightmares about drowning shadows. Cows refused to drink water. And far away in the royal palace, King Agu awoke suddenly from terrible dreams. King Agu was a wise ruler, respected throughout the village for his fairness and deep respect for ancient tradition. Though old age has whitened his beard, his mind remained sharp. That night, he dreamt of the river turning black. He saw fish floating dead upon the surface. He saw flames consuming Onini village while voices cried from beneath the waters. Then a golden tail disappeared under the blood-red waves. King Agu woke up breathing heavily. The palace priestess, Mama Ebere, was summoned immediately. She listened carefully to the king's dream and her expression darkened with fear. "The river spirits are angry," she said. Meanwhile, inside Uduak's hut, the mermaid remained silent while moonlight entered through cracks in the wall. Uduak sat nearby staring greedily at her golden scales. He imagined kings paying fortunes for such a creature. He imagined becoming the richest man in all neighboring lands. But shortly after midnight, the first scream echoed across the village. Uduak rushed outside. One fisherman's boat has mysteriously caught fire by the river bank. Villagers ran in panic carrying buckets of water. Then another scream erupted from the far side of the village. A child has disappeared near the river. Fear spread rapidly across the villagers. Dark clouds swallowed the moon, while fierce wind hollowed through the trees. Old women began crying. The river spirits are angry. An abomination has entered this land. Inside his chest, fear finally touched Uduak's heart. He looked back towards the hut where the golden mermaid waited silently. For the first time, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake, but pride still refused to let him surrender. Morning came, but no sunlight touched Onini village. Dark cloud covered the skies completely. People gathered nervously in the village square. 3 more children had vanished during the night. Fishing nets returned empty. Dead fish floated along the river banks, and worst of all, the river water has begun turning dark. Fear consumed everyone. Women held their children tightly while old men muttered prayers to ancestral spirits. Uzo stood among them, deeply troubled. "This is no ordinary disaster," he said quietly. Then the sound of royal drums echoed from the distance. King Agu had arrived. Villagers immediately bowed as the king entered the square, surrounded by palace guards, elders, and priestess Mama Ebere. King Agu's face looked grim. "I received warnings from the spirit," he announced. "Someone has committed a terrible offense against the sacred river." The priestess stepped forward carrying a bowl filled with sacred white chalk and herbs. Her old eyes slowly scanned the frightened villagers. "The spirit says something sacred has been stolen from the water," she declared. As those words, Odua felt cold, fear crawled down his spine. Sweat gathered on his forehead. Uzo noticed uneasiness immediately. Before anyone could speak further, a loud cry erupted from nearby. A fisherman ran into the square breathlessly. The river is swallowing boats. Everyone rushed towards the shore. The sight that awaited them froze their hearts. The Omari River had become violent beyond imagination. Huge waves crashed against the banks. Boats overturned without reason. Then suddenly, a deep voice echoes across the river. Return what was taken! Return what was taken! Villagers screamed in terror. What was taken? Some fell to their knees immediately. King Agu's face hardened. The priestess turned slowly towards the crowd. Whoever stole from the sacred river must confess now, she warned, or all Onini will suffer. Udua's legs trembled. His mind battled itself fiercely. Confess or remain silent. But before he could decide, a child pointed suddenly towards Uduak. Everyone turned. Uduak stood pale and shaking. Uzo stepped closer carefully. Uduak, he said softly, what have you done? The silence became unbearable. Finally, Uduak broke. I only wanted fortune, he shouted desperately. I did not know this would happen. King Agu's eye burned with fury. What did you take? Uduak swallowed hard. A golden mermaid. The entire village erupted in screams and panic. Everyone covered their mouth in horror. Mama Ebere nearly dropped her sacred bow. You fool, she cried. Do you know what you have done? Uduak's voice shook with fear. She said she would bring disaster if I kept her. King Agu roared. You brought a river spirit onto human land. Uduak fell to his knees. I only wanted blessing. Your greed has caused this kingdom, the king shouted. At that exact moment, lightning split the sky violently. The nearby tree exploded in flames. King Agu turned to his guards immediately. Bring the creature at once. The guards dragged Uduak towards the hut, while villagers followed in terrible silence. Inside the hut, the golden mermaid lay weakly inside the wooden tomb. Her once radiant scales had dimmed almost completely. When Mama Ebere saw her, tears filled the old priestess' eyes. She is dying, she whispered sadly. The mermaid slowly looked towards the king. If I die on land, she whispered weakly, the river will consume everything. Fear passed across everyone's face in the room. King Agu turned towards Uduak with unbearable disappointment. All this suffering because of your greed. Uduak finally understood the weight of his action. For the first time in his life, pride abandoned him. He fell with his face onto the floor. Forgive me, he cried. Please forgive me. But outside, the river continued rolling like an angry beast, and time was running out. The entire kingdom moved quickly under King Agu's command. Drummers were sent throughout Onene village, summoning every elders, priests, and fishermen to the river bank. The sacred fires were light, while villagers carried offerings of yams, kola nuts, palm oil, white goats, and carved wooden symbols to appeal the river spirits. The sky darkened further as if night has arrived early. The golden mermaid was carried carefully upon the wooden mat towards the river. Though weak, her glowy blue eyes remained calm. Udua walked behind her in chain. Not one villager spoke kindly to him. Some spat near his feet. Others looked at him with anger and sorrow. The shame crushed him heavier than the chains around his wrists. At the river bank, Mama Ebere began preparing the sacred sacrifice ritual. White chalk symbols were drawn upon the sand, while ancient song rose shakily from the elders' lips. King Agu stood before the raging river. Spirit of Omari, he called loudly, forgive the foolish man. Then Mama Ebere approached Uduak. You alone caused this disaster, she said coldly. You alone must beg the river for mercy. Tears streamed down Uduak's face. The proud fisherman who once mocked everyone now trembled like a frightened child. Slowly he approached the water. The mermaid looked at him quietly. You desire wealth, she whispered, but greed always hungers for more. Uduak fell to his knees before her. I have destroyed my people, he sobbed. The mermaid expression softened. The river punished pride so wisdom may grow. The priestess signaled the beginning of the sacrifice. White gold was offered. Palm oil was poured into the waters. Sacred chant rose louder. Finally, King Agu gave the final command, return her. Uduak himself carried the mermaid towards the river. Uduak himself carried the mermaid toward the river. The water flowed violently around his legs as he stepped deeper. Fear gripped him terribly, but he continued walking until the water reached his chest. Then suddenly, gently, he released the golden mermaid into the river. For a long moment, nothing happened. The mermaid floated silently upon the dark surface. Then suddenly, golden light exploded across the river. The waters became calmed instantly. The violent wind disappeared. Dark clouds slowly parted above the kingdom. Villagers watched in stunned silence. Mermaid's strength returned immediately. The mermaid's strength returned immediately. Once she touched the sacred waters, her scales glowed brilliantly once more. Before disappearing beneath the water, she looked one final time towards Uduak. Learn this, she said. A man who lives only for himself eventually destroys himself. Then she vanished beneath the water forever. The curse had been lifted, but the judgment upon Uduak still remained. King Agu stepped forward. Uduak, he declared before the entire kingdom. Your greed nearly destroyed Onini village. You ignore wisdom, disrespected sacred laws, and endangered innocent lives. Uduak lowered his head in shame. From this day onward, King Agu continued, you were banished from this kingdom forever. Uduak closed his eyes painfully. The river you worship more than humanity shall never belong to you, the king finished. The guards removed Uduak's chains. He was given no boat, no wealth, no honor, only excel. As Uduak walked slowly away from Onini village, carrying nothing but regret, no one stopped him, no one called his name. Only Uzo watched him disappear down the lonely path. There was sadness in Uzo's eyes, not hatred. Thank you very much for watching Tales by Grandma. Please don't forget to share, subscribe, and turn on the notification button for more interesting stories. I thank you so much for supporting my channel, for always viewing, liking, and commenting. Thank you. Bye.